How finding control creates real freedom, Neuroscience explained. She stood at the edge of her kitchen counter, staring at the same empty coffee mug she'd left there yesterday and the day before that. It wasn't about the mug. It was about everything she couldn't seem to hold together, no matter how hard she tried. Like most of us, she believed freedom meant having no limits, doing what she wanted, when she wanted, without restriction. But every time she chose impulse over intention, she felt smaller, more scattered, less like herself. She thought freedom was the absence of control, until neuroscience showed her the opposite was true. What happened next wasn't just a change in habit. It was a shift in how her brain perceived power itself. And it started with something most people overlook entirely. For years, researchers have tried to understand why some people feel empowered by their choices, while others feel controlled by them. The answer lives in a small but mighty region of the brain, called the anterior cingulate cortex. This area lights up when we make decisions that align with our values, not our impulses. It's the difference between choosing to move your body because it feels meaningful, versus forcing yourself out of guilt or shame. One creates freedom. The other creates friction. She didn't know any of this yet, but her brain did. Every time she followed through on something small, like drinking water first thing in the morning or tidying that mug before bed, her brain registered it as a win. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was hers. Part of her still doubted it could work. After all, she'd tried routines before meal prep. Morning pages, 5am. Wake-ups, and they always fell apart. She assumed she just wasn't disciplined enough. But discipline was never the problem. The problem was that she was chasing someone else's version of control, someone else's routine, someone else's definition of freedom. And her brain knew it. When we try to force behaviors that don't match our identity or nervous system, the brain treats them like threats. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning and restraint, starts to fatigue. Willpower becomes a fight. And eventually, we quit. But when control feels chosen, not imposed, everything shifts. Neuroscientists at Stanford found that people who felt autonomy in their routines showed increased dopamine activity. Even during mundane tasks, they weren't more motivated, they were more connected to the process. To themselves. She started testing this in small ways. Instead of forcing herself to exercise every day, she asked, what kind of movement actually feels good to me right now? Some days it was yoga, other days, just a walk around the block. And on the hardest days, nothing. But she didn't collapse into shame. She stayed present. Somewhere between the rigid plans and the total chaos, she found rhythm, not perfection, just enough structure to feel anchored, and enough flexibility to feel human. Her mornings became quieter, not because she woke up earlier, but because she stopped rushing through them like they didn't matter. She'd light a candle, sip her coffee slowly, write 3 things she wanted to feel that day, not accomplish, but feel. Calm, focused, alive. It sounds simple, but simplicity is what the nervous system craves when it's been running on overdrive. Then came the setback. A week where everything unraveled, work stress, a family conflict, sleep that wouldn't come. She skipped her morning ritual, let the mug pile up again, stopped checking in with herself entirely. For a moment, she thought she'd lost it, that fragile sense of control she'd been building. But this time, something was different. Instead of spiraling into guilt, she noticed the pattern. She didn't judge herself for falling off. She just asked, what do I need right now to feel safe again? And the answer was smaller than she expected. Just one thing, one intentional choice. Researchers call this locus of control, the belief that we have influence over our own outcomes. People with a strong internal locus of control experience less anxiety, better emotional regulation, and greater life satisfaction. Not because they control everything, but because they trust their ability to respond. She wasn't controlling her emotions, she was learning to navigate them. And that distinction changed everything. The brain thrives on predictability, but not rigidity. When we create small, repeatable moments of agency, the nervous system begins to relax. It stops scanning for danger. It starts building trust. What surprised her most wasn't just how much better she felt, but how everything started to feel different once she switched to the right method. She wasn't expecting such a clear change, and honestly, she tested it more than a few times before she figured out what really worked. That this isn't a promotion, just sharing real results that made a noticeable difference for her. She started using a habit tracker, not the overwhelming kind with 30 boxes to check, but a simple one that let her mark just 3 intentions per day. It gave her brain the feedback loop it needed: clarity, completion, and proof. I'll leave the link below if you want to explore what I mean. But here's where it gets deeper. Freedom isn't just about doing what you want, it's about knowing what you want and why. Most of us live on autopilot, reacting to notifications, expectations, other people's urgency. We think we're free because we're busy, but busyness isn't freedom. It's distraction dressed up as productivity. Real freedom comes when you pause long enough to ask, is this mine? Is this choice aligned with who I'm becoming? Or am I just performing someone else's script? She started asking herself that question every day. At first, the answers were uncomfortable. She realized how much of her life was built around pleasing others, avoiding conflict, keeping up appearances. None of it was wrong, but none of it was hers, so she started saying no, not aggressively, just honestly, no. I can't take that on right now. No. I need a night to myself. No. That doesn't feel right for me. And every time she said it, her nervous system exhaled. Psychologists have found that people who set clear boundaries experience lower cortisol levels and greater emotional resilience. Not because they're selfish, but because they're self-aware. OUND, Aries aren't walls. They're frameworks. They give the brain permission to rest, because it knows where it begins and ends. She wasn't isolating. She was integrating, learning to hold space for herself, without abandoning others. Sometimes, we only understand strength when it's tested. And for her, the test came quietly. A friend asked her to take on a project she didn't have capacity for. A year ago, she would have said yes immediately, then burned out, trying to deliver. This time, she paused, felt the familiar tug of guilt, but underneath it, something steadier. I get to choose. She said no, and nothing fell apart. In fact, the friendship deepened because it was finally built on truth, not obligation. What would you do in that moment? Would you push through and prove you could handle it? Or would you trust that saying no is also a form of care? These micro decisions shape our identity more than we realize. Each time we choose alignment over approval, the brain it learns. I am safe when I honor myself. And that safety becomes the foundation for everything else. Confidence, clarity, real. Embodied freedom. She laughed one morning, realizing progress didn't always look like progress. There were still messy days, still moments of doubt, but the difference was she didn't collapse into them anymore. She moved through them. Like weather passing through an open window, she'd learned something most people spend a lifetime avoiding. Control isn't about domination. It's about discernment, knowing what to hold and what to release. Neuroscience backs this up in profound ways. The brain's default mode network, active during rest and reflection, is where we process identity, meaning, and purpose. When we constantly override this system with busyness and distraction, we lose touch with who we are. But when we give it space, even just 10 minutes a day, it starts to reorganize. Old narratives loosen. New patterns emerge. She started journaling at night, not to solve anything, just to witness her own thoughts without judgment. And slowly, she began to recognize herself again. Freedom, she realized, wasn't something she had to chase, that it was something she had to allow. By creating space, by setting boundaries, by choosing presence over performance. The brain doesn't need to be fixed, it needs to be felt, or honored. And when we do that, when we stop fighting ourselves and start working with our nervous system, everything shifts. Not all at once, but steadily. Like roots, growing deeper in quiet soil. This isn't medical advice, just an exploration of what neuroscience and lived experience reveal. If you're struggling with motivation, emotional regulation, or feeling stuck, please reach out to a licensed professional who can support you properly. But if you're simply looking for a way back to yourself, start small. One choice, one boundary, one moment of intentional presence. That's where freedom begins. When she looked in the mirror again, it wasn't her reflection that had changed, it was what she believed about herself. She wasn't perfect, she wasn't healed, but she was here, fully, finally, and that was enough. Tell us what part of this story resonated most and where you're watching from. See you in the next video. Bye.